Welcome to NucleCast, the official podcast of the ANWA Deterrent Center. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, co-founder and vice president for research at the National Institute for Deterrent Studies. The ANWA Deterrent Center is a 501c3 organization ensuring a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent and its ongoing modernization. Thank you for listening and welcome to the show. The views of the host and the guests are their own.
Welcome back to another great episode of NucleCast, the podcast of the ANWA Deterrent Center. Of course, I'm your host, Adam Lowther, and today we've got, we do this every single episode. We have a great guest, and in keeping with that proud tradition, we've got another great guest today. Of course, I'm talking about Rick Fisher, who is a senior fellow with the International Assessment and Strategy Center. He's got a great background. He is probably one of the best in the country on North Korea. And of course, that's an important topic. North Korea has been very busy in its development of its nuclear arsenal lately. And we thought, well, what do we do at NucleCast? Well, we talk to the best people in the country. And who is that? Well, that's Rick Fisher when it comes to North Korea. So that's what we're doing today. So Rick, thanks for joining us on NucleCast.
Adam, it's great to be here. I'm really excited to be contributing to your podcasts, and you have an excellent organization, clearly with an essential mission.
Yeah, it's one of those things where our objective is to educate not only most of our listeners are within the nuclear enterprise, but we also have listeners that come from outside that get interested in the topic, and then they start listening and they're like, wow, this is kind of interesting. And so we're hoping, of course, to grow the workforce and grow the expertise in the topic. Now, I said you're the nation's best on North Korea, and there's a lot going on right now. Can you sort of kick us off with an update on what all is going on with the North Korean nuclear program?
Okay, well, in short, North Korea, in my opinion, is on a trajectory by at least the mid-2030s to have the ability, at least, to loft enough warheads to conduct a catastrophic first strike against the United States nuclear capability as it exists today. Now, that's a tall assessment to make, but it's one that I believe is potentially realistic, and one that we definitely have to watch as closely as we can. Now, before I describe how this capability is coming together, I think it's important to credit some of the other greats who have contributed to the open source intelligence gathering field focused on North Korea. It's a varied field, but all of us who write and monitor North Korea benefit from folks like Joe Bermudez, Gerald Bogle, Robert Collins, Jeff Lewis, journalist Colin Zwerko, who all follow North Korea as best they can. Some are very good at mobilizing open source overhead satellite imagery, and this has contributed to our understanding. Now, on top of this, the North Koreans have also themselves offered a great number of teases, especially over the last 3 to 4 years regarding their developing nuclear missile capabilities. And while this is not enough to produce definitive estimates as to where they're going, it does enable some degree of speculation.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of where they're going, just in terms of things that can hit the United States, they're ICBMs, specifically looking at their two main types of ICBMs, the liquid-fueled Hwasong-17, which has about a 2.4 meter diameter, and the solid fuel Hwasong-18, which has a 2.2 meter diameter thereabouts. What I have done is to simply take the largest numbers that are displayed in the main North Korean military parades, and then try to add the numbers that Kim Jong-un has revealed in images of his visits to the factories, at least, that make the transporter erector launchers for these missiles. And if you add up the parades and the factory numbers, I estimate that North Korea may have 23 Hwasong-17s and about 20 Hwasong-18s. With estimates for when production began, I estimate that in terms of Hwasong-17s, they may be about 2.8 per year. But Hwasong-18s may be coming along at about 5 per year. Again, these are just the sketchiest of estimates. But then when you take this production rate and roll it out to 2030, we're looking at maybe 83 of these ICBMs. And North Korea is also working on MIRV technology, multiple independently targetable warheads. They claim to have done their first test on June 27 this year. The very next day, South Korean intelligence sources told South Korean media that the test was a failure, that the launch vehicle was destroyed. But look, if there's one test, there will be future tests. There will probably be regular MIRV demonstrations. And my concern is that North Korea is perhaps either an investor or a purchaser of Pakistan's recently developed MIRV capabilities.
Let me ask you a question before you go on. And so one of the burning questions I have is this, the challenge for any sort of growing nuclear program is having sufficient special nuclear material, the fissile material required to build warheads, to build pits. I've, looked at what North Korea, we think they're doing domestically. Do you see them producing domestically all of, the fissile material they need? Or do you see them turning to the Russians in particularly now that they have, a alliance or a treaty with the Russians? Do you see them as turning to the Russians and the Russians, in exchange for support of warfighting materials for the Ukraine conflict in exchange for, fissile material. How is this working out where, Kim can grow his arsenal and have the material for the warheads he requires?
Well, in 2023, last year, the Korean Institute for Defense Analysis estimated that North Korea today may have already about 90 warheads, but also revealed the estimate that the goal would be for 300.
Yeah.
And that was simply, as I understand, based on domestic production. Of course, the North Koreans have invested heavily in the complete nuclear cycle and the production of uranium, the fabrications of plutonium. We can actually count the factories, at least the ones that are above ground. The ones that are underground, another question. But your point about possible Russian sharing is spot on and very, very important. I mean, the latest figures just out today that the North Koreans have shipped 13,000 shipping containers worth of weapons to Russia. 13,000. That works out potentially to about 11 million artillery shells. It's probably not that many, probably a lot of artillery rockets. And of course, we already know about short range, medium range ballistic missiles that the North Koreans have transferred to the Russians. But the potential of 11 million artillery shells puts Russia in Kim Jong-un's debt enormously. So what is Kim after? Combat aircraft. I mean, he made this high profile visit to Komsomolsk last October. I believe he sat in the cockpit of the Sukhoi 57, Russia's premier 4+ or 5th generation combat aircraft. But space, nuclear are probably much higher on Kim's wish list. And so, indeed, the degree to which the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and the Iranians are now basically more than pals, allies to the degree of getting rid of their mutual enemies and especially taking down the Americans. Yes, they're allies, and under that rubric, Chinese help for North Korea has been flowing, in my estimation, for 20 years. And with the completion of the new North Korean-Russian defense treaty, I think this is what could transpire is really only bounded by our imagination, and that's awfully bad news.
So as you look at not only the relationship, and it seems to be, I thought there for a while that North Korea would be on the outs with the Chinese. And I've wondered, the last time I was in Korea, somebody reminded me, hey, that the Koreans, the North Koreans, there's this whole, an old adage that the borrower is slave to the lender, except when you borrow so much that you can, destroy the lender if you default. And that, there was this relationship, there's this point in the relationship between North Korea and China where North Korea can cause so much trouble that that China is now sort of at the mercy of the North Koreans. Is that how you see the relationship playing out, or do you still see China's in control? Russia's exchanging, quantities of munitions for, support in its nuclear program and some of these high technology capabilities they need. and China's still providing food and still just trying to manage the reins and keep the North Koreans from just causing quite too much trouble. How do you see that all working out?
The Chinese are the ringleaders.
Okay.
What we have seen unfold in North Korea has already unfolded in Pakistan. The Pakistani nuclear and missile sector was built by China. Yes, the Pakistanis have inherited everything. They run the factories. They build missiles. They build bombs and all that. But that was all enabled by China. Yes, the Pakistanis certainly scrambled and picked up pieces from hither and yon, but it came together because of China. And as the Pakistanis have now taken to, at least under AQ Khan, exporting early Chinese nuclear designs, we see so much of the same behaviors in North Korea. In the late 1990s, the Pakistanis started displaying missiles with funky tells. They kind of looked like they were based on Chinese tells, but they were completely different. They were built to look different. In my opinion, this was part of China's deception operation. They wanted to conceal that these tells were right out of the Chinese factory. They've stopped doing that. And also, they've stopped doing that with North Korea. I mean, the tells are now, in my opinion, all built from Chinese components. And they're all basically come from the tell factories of the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, or CASIC. Now, if you're selling somebody a 16 or 18 or 22 wheel truck to carry a liquid fueled or a solid fuel ballistic missile, you darn well better have as much knowledge as possible, intimate knowledge of the missile that truck is carrying. I mean, a hairline fracture is the only difference between a solid fuel ICBM and a solid fuel bomb that blows up on the launch pad.
Yeah.
So that truck has to be the suspension has to be an amazing creation in order to cushion that missile so that it doesn't become damaged and fail on the launch pad between the concealment point and the launch point. Now, the Chinese, yes, they certainly benefited from Russian MAZ factory technology acquired in perhaps the early mid-1990s, but they've simply gone above and beyond the Russians in this field. And I think the latest 22-wheel North Korean tell is indicative of this. But I go off on a tangent here, Adam. Sorry. So this is how close the Chinese and the North Koreans are. They're as close as the Chinese and the Pakistanis, and they've encouraged traffic between the Pakistanis and the North Koreans, as they've encouraged traffic between the North Koreans and the Iranians, who will be the next to be revealed as a Chinese-assisted nuclear enterprise.
Now it's that time in the show where we have to take a quick break, so we'll do that now. But come back after the break. Stay tuned. We're talking to Rick Fisher. We're talking about North Korea, and we'll be right back. This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the ANWA Deterrent Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence. And we're back. Now, Rick, we were talking about this relationship between the Chinese and the North Koreans. Adding the Russians into it and sort of this, what I've called, an alliance or a league of autocracy. Is this sort of addition of Russia sort of some of the old is new again because the Soviets were involved, and then the Russians had their challenges, and then they're now back, or is it a new dynamic? Is it one that's sort of been there the whole time and therefore has been largely stable? How does that that three body problem work?
Well, this is a problem that resides in the beginning in the main in Beijing. It is the Chinese Communist Party which has the goal of achieving global hegemony. I mean, their ambitions, Adam, could be galactic. I mean, as an aside here, about a year and 8 days ago, the other main Chinese rocket company, China Aerospace Science and Technology, CISC, one of their top officials gave a paper about basically a 200-year program to occupy our solar system. Now, if you have an ambition that extends that far, before you're occupying the moon, Mars, and beyond, you got to have the Earth locked down, be the hegemon there, and on top of that, you have to have the most powerful nuclear force, and you probably want to have accomplished subordination of not just Taiwan, destruction of Taiwan's democracy, but the subordination of every other democracy. So now what we are seeing today is, okay, China has started its role toward global hegemony of the Earth-Moon system, and then beyond. And Vladimir Putin basically decided in the late 2000s, early 2010s, okay, he was going to join full force, stop. North Koreans were already in the mix. They're a dependent, they're a proxy, and they're an out in fully and becoming integrated into Russia's war, and all this mountains of ammunition that they have will be very useful once Russia starts attacking Moldova or Poland or the Baltics. And then you have the Iranians. I mean, they've already set up at least for 2 to 3 wars, and they're helping the Russians as well. And when China starts actively killing people, starting on Taiwan most likely, but then moving on to other places, North Korea, Russia, and Iran will be contributing to those wars.
That is, that's sort of I don't know that many people understand quite well just how expansive the aspirations of the Chinese are. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about what their aspirations are. I wonder, though, the Russians have historically had this tenuous relationship with the Chinese because they're concerned that the Chinese want Russian land. And so they have a large nuclear force directed east and south. Do you see is there any ability to sort of peel the Russians off from this, this triumvirate? Or do you think that they're going to stay lockstep with the Chinese? Because they have to understand they're a junior partner in this relationship these days.
Well, the story is not mine per se, and I if you haven't already had some time with Phil Carver on your show, I would strongly recommend that you ask him about this. It's largely his story, but in the early 2010s, there was a brief flowering of open Russian real concern about the Chinese, but Putin basically shut it down and just it's just leave it at that. He shut it down. So you're absolutely right. The anxiety is there. I mean, it's always been there, and it goes back centuries. Of course, we understand this, but with Putin in charge, the first order of business is taking down Russia's near enemies and then taking down Russia's far enemies. And Putin is fully aligned with the Chinese Communist Party in achieving that goal.
Now, it's that time in the show where I like to bring out Bob the Genie. And so as I rub my magic lamp and, Bob grants all guests 3 wishes, so long as those wishes are related to the topics we've been discussing. So, Rick, you're a lucky man. Bob is granting you 3 wishes today. So as Bob the Genie grants your 3 wishes, Rick, what is your first wish?
My first wish, for the sake of the continuation of freedom on this planet, is that the United States lead a massive revival to basically Cold War levels of nuclear force in order to be able to deter the quadrilateral nuclear threats that are congealing and growing from China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. I mean, we need to be considering 8, 9, 10,000 warheads, and our nuclear allies have to greatly increase their game as well. And not just strategic, but the regional force, which was gutted after the collapse of the Soviet Communist Party, has to be rebuilt. And this is really the only way that we're going to avoid the draft here in the United States, and we're going to be able to prevent wars that could become global in character, that could start in a number of locations: Northeast Asia, Taiwan Strait, the Middle East, and Europe. That's wish number 1. Do I get 2 more?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big wish in and of itself, but you bring up a good point about the draft. I don't think most people think about it. And given our recruiting challenges in a country that has got 3 times the population that it had, 70 years ago, and yet we've got a military that's roughly a third the size it was. So we've got more people, a smaller military, and yet we still can't recruit. So we have a challenge there. So, and, I think Curtis McGiffin would agree with you that nuclear weapons are one way to help reduce that requirement. Okay, so that's a good wish. How about wish number 2?
Wish number 2 would be that, that Ronald Reagan's dream for a national missile defense finally find its place in Donald Trump's idea for an Iron Dome over the United States. I haven't looked into the specifics, if indeed they exist, of what Trump is proposing, but the time is long overdue that a superior nuclear offensive deterrent capability also be further strengthened by a national defensive capability that, as envisioned by so many of its supporters going back to the 1980s, was to make sure that our enemies, potential enemies, would view negotiated stability as far preferable to an endless nuclear arms race. That would be wish number 2. Wish number 3 would be Star Wars. Look, the Chinese want to take their dominion to the end of our solar system, and by the time that happens, we'll be long gone. But the means might exist for our species to become galactic. That we have the ability to access habitable exoplanets around any number of nearby stars. So, the time is now for there to be leadership from the United States in explaining that the Chinese Communist Party threat is potentially galactic, and that we have to be aware of this and we have to be ready to defend against it. I mean, just about a year ago, a prominent Chinese aerospace journal outlined 2 moon access strategies. One that would utilize basically China's version of the SpaceX Starship, 2-stage, reusable, 50 to 100 tons to the moon. The second strategy would use their smaller Long March 10 space launch vehicle, but it would also utilize a small space station at the Earth-Moon Lagrangian point number 1, which is essentially right between the Earth and the Moon, basically setting up China to be able to have an armed space station to deny access to the moon. So, this would basically mean you could sit on your back porch and on a clear night and with the full moon and a modest hobbyist telescope, you could watch laser battles in space. We need to get ahead of this, and we need to be able to. The Chinese space program is entirely dual use, and we need to wake up to this and be ready for it.
Yeah, that's one we'll have to do a separate episode on, because I think many listeners are going to be like, what? Space? The Chinese really want to control space? But that's a separate topic, and we'll come back another day and we'll discuss these aspirations. Okay, so your final wish.
Well, those are my 3 wishes. I don't want the genie to be scared off. Nuclear deterrent capability, missile defense, and understanding of China's galactic space challenge.
Yeah, it's I think I know you've spoken on this in other venues, and it's one I haven't heard before. So at some point we'll have to have you come back, because I think some of the listeners are, because you mentioned papers and journal articles where the Chinese have talked about this. And so I'm sure some of the listeners are like, how serious do you think the Chinese are when they sort of say these things or write these things? Are they really thinking about controlling the entire solar system? And are they really thinking about trying to deny building, offensive, bases on the moon and things of that nature to, keep the Americans off? Are they serious? That's probably what some of the listeners are thinking to themselves, just as we, in the show, and we can kind of tease for a future event. Is this something that we should really think the Chinese are serious about?
Well, I should also be a little more clear. The problem in determining the true trajectory of Chinese ambitions is a problem that we have faced in trying to discern the direction of the threat from all of our historic communist adversaries. I mean, this was especially an amazing problem during the Cold War, the Soviet era.
Yeah.
I mean, they simply don't spell it out for us. They don't let us watch their budgetary process. We can't go to their institutes and chat up all their experts that are working on the budget for next year and all that. They very much seek to conceal, deny transparency, and make it very difficult for us to basically understand what it is they're doing. So, I mean, I've been doing this all of my career, but basically trying to read between the lines, trying to say, okay, they're developing these capabilities. How could these capabilities threaten us? Because in so many other aspects of their behavior, they are indeed becoming a major threat. And when you start from the perspective of Mao having killed 50 to 70 million of his own people, and not one of them having received any measure of justice from any of Mao's successors, I think we should be very concerned about the trajectory of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, if they get control of Taiwan, those 23 million people, I mean, there's no assurance for them. They are as secure as a Uyghur, secure as a Tibetan. It's awful. It's horrible. The Chinese virus killed 6 million people around the globe. Has anybody even tried to establish what compensation China owes those 6 million families? No. China gets away with this again and again, and they will try to get away with it again and again, only because we let them.
Yeah. Good points. Well, we'll have to come back and talk some more about these China dilemmas on another podcast. So, Rick Fisher, thanks for joining us on NucleCast.
Adam, it's been a privilege. Thank you for the invitation.
And thanks to you, the listeners, for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you next time.
This has been a production of the Anwa Deterrent Center, a 501c3 that seeks to educate key decision makers, stakeholders, and the public to ensure a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent. Our executive producer is Kimberly Charrington, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Crumthal. Help us grow our followers by sharing it and follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast.